Hello everybody, it's me, Archducer, or you can call me Rumpel Schnapskins, or just Rumpel for short, doesn't matter. And this video will actually be pretty straightforward. This will be a full tutorial on essentially how to properly do formations. We're going to be covering basically two different types of formations. We'll be basically covering wedges and shoulder to shoulder. Now here is basically the models that I've set up. Now the models at the front are the correct ones, and the models at the back are the incorrect ones. Let's start with the most basic and well-known one, shoulder to shoulder. Now, this is the correct way. As you can see, the shoulders are basically touching each other and are equally aligned. You take two squares and then you put them together, which, oh, it makes a rectangle, if you knew that in around kindergarten. Now, basically continues here and here and here until the end. And essentially, it's basically everything needs to be symmetrical. Like, look how good that looks. Now, essentially, let's just say you have an extra person. I would recommend that there are three types. There's one at the back, basically being symmetrical to the others, and there's one basically directly touching the other shoulders, leaving a gap. And then there's one basically, since, you can't really see the person, especially when you do screenshots like this, there's one where you can basically kind of see the person, and it's in the middle between these two. Now, the incorrect way of doing wedges is basically, as you can see, these are 100% not symmetrical. You can see the shoulders, and you could see that there are like massive gaps between. Like, you can see that these are two different types of squares, two completely different squares. Some are touching, some are really touching, some are like not even lining up correctly. So, oops, sorry. And you could see that this is like almost a shoulder to shoulder. And now, this is what I've seen pretty much sometimes, that these STSs are actually made like this, especially through trainings, raids, or whatever. And this is the incorrect way. And as you can see here, I've made these lines, and this isn't symmetrical at all. So this is basically a no-no to do, so something like that, yeah. Okay, now let's move on to basically the most easiest part, is basically the shoulder to shoulder. Now, there are two types of shoulder to shoulders. Number one, you have the famous hand touching, and then you have the shoulder spaces. Now, by far, let's just say that if you have a lot of people and you can't really fit them into one place and you need some space, this is by far basically the easiest and the most reliable type of shoulder to shoulder. Now, especially, I'd like to call this the homosexual shoulder to shoulder, because you are actively holding hands, as you can see. But basically, it is actually really simple. You just gotta make sure that your shoulders are exactly touching each other. Now, of course, the incorrect way, as you can see, is that there is actually a gap between the shoulder to shoulder. Like, you see that they are basically holding hands, but there's a small gap. There's another small gap. These two love each other. There's a large gap, and there's another small gap. Basically, when you're doing this type of shoulder to shoulder, it is, of course, not recommended at all. Now, this is also a second type of shoulder to shoulder, especially when you have, basically, when you have basically a less amount of people, and you basically need to space them out. Now, as you can see here, this is called the shoulder space. As you can see, when you measure someone's shoulder, they have to be basically three models have to be actively touching. Now, by far, this is the hardest STS to do, and it's not really recommended to do it fully symmetrical, and I actually do recommend actually making it look identical to the best of your ability. Now, you see here, every single model is exactly symmetrical, and they're equally spaced out. And another thing here is that you have the incorrect way, which is essentially, there's a shoulder, and you see there's like two gaps between. There's a large gap, there's a small gap, there's a small gap, and there's, actively holding hands. These two love each other, and there's basically large gaps. Now, these are not actually recommended to do at all. This is like, not recommended. Now, these are actually the correct ways. Like I said before, Of course, the easiest way to do a wedge is, of course, making your both arms look like rectangles, or basically being symmetrical. And the easiest shoulder to shoulder is basically to do the homosexual one. But other than that, yes, that is pretty much it for the tutorial. I hope this gets in your head.